Fatshark recently posted a dev blog concerning upcoming changes to the crafting and gear acquisition systems in Darktide. These changes are good, but they fail to solve the core problems with Darktide's loot system. I'm gonna go over one particularly alarming statement in the dev blog and then go in depth about why the loot system of Darktide is fundamentally broken, and why Fatshark's vision for it just doesn't work. This statement shows Fatshark either fundamentally doesn't understand how the gear system they have created actually functions in practice, or that they do understand that it doesn't function, and instead want players to keep gambling until they hit the jackpot. With modifiers, perks, and blessings, they haven't created a system where items can be exciting and different. There is no variety or diversity for weapons of the same type with different attributes, because all of the different variables only result in a flowchart with binary checks. Does this have the stats necessary to be optimal? If yes, upgrade it. Did it get the perks it needed? If both are bad, the weapon is bricked. Start over. If it did get at least one perk that's needed, does it have the blessings it needs? If both are bad, it's bricked. Start over. When modifiers and perks matter, it's nearly exclusively because you need to reach a breakpoint. There isn't an infinite variety of grenade gauntlets I can find, only the ones that can one-shot bombers and trappers and the ones that can't. And there isn't an infinite variety of bolters, only the ones that can open bulwarks in one shot and kill shotgunners in one shot in the body while in volley fire, and the ones that can't do that. The list goes on. The layered RNG ensures that finding an optimal weapon of a certain type isn't just a matter of finding one with the right base modifiers. It needs to have the right modifiers, have the correct perk, and in some cases, like for most melee weapons, for instance, the necessary blessing. Now, everything I say comes from the perspective of items needing to function at the highest levels of play, and I understand that this might be met with indifference from the more casual players. However, all of my points about how grindy, random, and exhausting obtaining what you need is still hold true when it comes to obtaining what you want. In fact, experimentation and weapon variety, ironically, are the biggest victims of this overly luck-based loot system. Since you can't reroll everything on your weapon after it's complete, you simply don't get to experiment with it. Instead, you need to start the chain of gambling all over again. Find another weapon of the same type with good modifiers, upgrade it, hope you get at least one perk and one blessing you actually want all over again, and then reroll the ones you want to change and start comparing the two weapons. What this means is that the current system is both terrible for actually acquiring gear, and then once you finally have the thing that you wanted, you don't get to play with it at all, killing a big part of the game's longevity in the process. The fact that Fatshark only lets us reroll one perk and one blessing means only one thing. They want us to keep gambling away resources and well-rolled weapons until we get the thing we want. This isn't creating player engagement, it's destroying it. All the fixes coming are good, but they fail to properly address the loot lottery. All of the gambling has to go. The experience of upgrading and rerolling curios only to brick them by getting something useless while making them orange is a nightmare, as is bricking weapons that had otherwise perfect base stats. Not having a shared inventory further compounds this issue, since if you want to use the same gun on two different characters, you need to gamble your way to a functional weapon all over again. Please, for now, let us reroll both perks and both blessings. Let us improve or at least redistribute weapon stats so that we can bypass this awful equipment lottery entirely. I say for now because I don't want them to attempt to fix the current system in the long term. It needs to be ripped out entirely. The upcoming changes are like applying a band-aid to something that is in dire need of amputation. Fatshark has made a huge mistake by holding on to a loot system that failed to fit within their games for the third time in a row. This isn't Diablo, where pooping out gear with a zillion stats and attributes can potentially lead to interesting item acquisition. They've created tight, mechanically intense co-op shooters, where item functionality has always been, and will always be, this needs to achieve this thing or that thing, and if it doesn't, it goes in the trash. Missing breakpoints by a couple percent is neither fun or engaging. I know that bringing up Deep Rock Galactic is basically like putting the Fatshark version of Godwin's Law in effect, but in that game, where instead of looting random variations of one gun until I find the one that works, I have a stable baseline that I am then free to customize at will. This actually allows for the build variety and diversity of equipment Fatshark claims to have but fundamentally cannot have. Every gun in that game has at least 2 completely different viable builds, some even more. I can't think of a single item in either Vermintide 2 or Darktide that has more than one way to build it. Besides, even if the gear system allowed for that kind of flexibility and variety within a single weapon, the RNG-based loot and restrictive upgrade system would ensure that we would never get to experience it. With the ability to indefinitely change up the perks, stats, and blessings on all our items, we still wouldn't have an interesting customization system. I want to see meaningful weapon mods, attachments, anything to give me a reason to tinker with my gear and try new things in the long run. Fatshark, your game is dying. One of the most hated aspects of it, and one of the primary reasons for its death, is this horrible, pointless, exploitative loot system. The systems you've made for gear acquisition and crafting are fundamentally broken, and they are broken at their very core. You can't keep applying little fixes here and there to make it more palatable. It might make it more bearable and easier to bypass, leading to less wasted time to finally get the thing that you want, but it would never lead to an interesting experience where people get to properly customize and experiment with their gear in the long run. You have to rip the entire system out and give us a proper customization system, like the one that was supposed to be in the game. You would get rid of the worst aspect of Darktide, and add a way for players to meaningfully engage with their gear in the long term. I understand that this isn't the easiest solution, but you have to let go of the abomination you have created if you want Darktide to have any chance to succeed. I want to believe in a redemption arc for this game, as I'm sure most people who've left negative reviews or stopped playing entirely also do, and I am convinced those who left will be ready to come back once you've fixed all of the core issues with the game. It's going to take a lot of work, it's going to take a lot of time, but Fatshark, I promise you it will be worth it. Everyone who has abandoned Darktide, and everyone who has left a negative review, doesn't hate you or your game. We want to love Darktide, but not in its current state.